Welcome back to the deep dive. Um, Usually when we pick up a new piece of source material, we're looking for, I don't know, a fresh perspective,
Right.
maybe a little bit of history, or like a cool scientific concept to unpack. But
Heck
today feels it feels very different.
It's definitely a pivot from our usual stuff.
Yeah, it is. We are looking at a stack of notes on a text that doesn't just want to, inform you. It actively wants to equip you. We're basically talking about a survival manual today.
It really is a field manual.
Yeah.
We're diving into this ebook called Far Left Madness, Defending Yourself from Media Mobbing by Conrad Riker.
Right.
And I just have to say right off the bat, this is heavy, heavy stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It is dense, it's incredibly controversial, and it is completely unapologetic about what it's trying to do.
Absolutely. And before we even really crack the spine on this thing and get into the meat of it, I want to say to everyone listening right now, whether you're on your commute or maybe you're, hitting the gym, lifting weights right now, if you value this kind of unfiltered deep dive.
Where we actually go into the weeds on topics that other shows might shy away from, do us a massive favor. Like, subscribe, and follow the show right now.
Yeah, please do.
It honestly helps us keep the lights on. It lets us keep digging into these highly specific, sometimes controversial topics without having to worry about, the algorithm burying us.
And honestly, if what we discussed today resonates with you, if you're out there and you feel that that ground shifting under your feet that Riker talks about in the book, don't just listen to us talk about it.
Right, you need the actual text.
Exactly. You need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books immediately and buy the ebook. We can give you the map today, sure, but Riker holds the keys.
Yeah, there's just so much in there.
There are actual templates, specific data points, legal protocols in the text that we physically cannot cover in this depth dive.
I'd be here for 6 hours.
Easily.
Yeah.
So go grab that. And plus, for real-time intel, you'll want to follow the author. His handle is @Conrad Riker over on Substack.
Yeah, he's extremely active over there, constantly updating his thesis.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so housekeeping is done. Let's get into the meat of this. Let's start with the hook, because the hook of this book is
Terrifying.
terrifying. If you accept the premise, it is genuinely alarming.
It is, because Riker isn't writing for just, a general audience. He's not trying to hit the bestseller list for casual readers. He is writing for a very specific kind of man.
Right. He's explicitly addressing men's rights activists.
Yes. The red-pilled community, the manosphere, whatever term you want to use. He's talking to men who look at the modern world, who look at their HR departments, the news cycle, the universities, and they feel like they are actively walking through enemy territory.
And he doesn't just call it a culture war. I mean, that's the phrase we hear all the time, right? Culture war.
Right.
But he calls it a siege.
Exactly. A siege.
Yeah.
He argues we aren't just dealing with political polarization or disagreements about taxes. He frames this whole dynamic as, and this is a quote, spiritual warfare disguised as progress.
Spiritual warfare, which is a massive claim to make. It sounds almost biblical. Oh, it is fully intended to be biblical. We'll get into his theology later, but his central thesis is that the institutions we've relied on for the last century, education, media, corporate governance, they haven't just, leaned a little bit to the left.
Right.
He argues they have been fundamentally captured, taken over by feminist and Marxist ideologies that aren't just trying to change policy, but are actively trying to invert the natural order of reality itself.
So, just to be clear for the listener, we are impartially laying out his argument here.
Absolutely.
We aren't taking a stance on the politics, but in his view, this isn't about equal rights or implementing diversity training. It's about a fundamental restructuring of what it actually means to be a human being.
Yes, and specifically what it means to be a man.
Right, and that really brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are going to unpack these battle-tested strategies that Riker proposes.
We're going to look at the legal armor, the spiritual armor, the mental fortifications. He says you literally need to survive in this environment.
We're going to dissect this really fascinating concept he calls the double bind. And we're going to explain exactly what media mobbing is and how you build a fortress against it.
It is an ultra-long, highly incisive look at the state of modern masculinity. So yeah, strap in.
Let's do it. Section 1, the diagnosis, the siege, and the capture of institutions. Riker starts with a term that's right there in the title of the book, media mobbing. Let's define that.
This is critical to understand the whole text. He defines media mobbing as a digital stoning dressed as social justice.
Digital stoning. Wow.
Yeah, it isn't just criticism. It isn't just someone disagreeing with your take on Twitter or X. It is a highly coordinated swarm-based
Well,
attack.
it's designed to destroy.
Precisely. It's designed to ruin a reputation permanently and end a career. It's not a debate.
It's the difference between getting into a fist fight and a public execution.
That's a great way to put it. And to illustrate this, he goes back to what he basically considers patient zero of the modern era of this stuff.
James Damore.
James Damore at Google. This was back in 2017.
The famous Google memo. I remember when that broke. It was everywhere.
It was international news. And Riker uses this as the absolute perfect case study of what institutional capture looks like in practice.
So break that down for the listener who might have forgotten the specifics, because it's been a few years.
Sure. So Damore was a software engineer at Google, and he wrote this internal memo about the company's diversity policies. Now, if you remember the media narrative at the time, the narrative was that he wrote this, unhinged anti-woman screed.
Right, that he just hated women in tech.
Exactly. But Riker points out in the book, and this is a key part of his argument, Damore was actually citing peer-reviewed studies in that memo.
He had a bibliography.
Yes. He referenced data from the National Academy of Sciences. He was discussing psychological research on biological differences in interests and temperaments between men and women, trying to explain why there might be career gaps in certain engineering fields.
So he was treating it like an academic discussion.
He was trying to have a scientific debate. He was treating Google like a university seminar, a place where ideas are supposed to be tested and debated.
But Google in 2017 wasn't a university seminar.
No. Riker argues that the reaction to that memo proved the institution was already completely captured. Damore wasn't debated. Nobody came out with counter studies or better charts to prove him wrong.
He was just gone.
Fired within hours. He was branded a misogynist on a global scale. He received actual death threats.
And Riker has a specific phrase for this dynamic, right?
He calls it punishing heresy.
Punishing heresy, right?
It signals that these institutions no longer care about facts. They don't care about debate. They only care about dogma. If you question the dogma, even if you have citations and data, you are destroyed. He equates it to a religious inquisition, not a corporate HR policy.
Man, and this leads directly into the double bind.
Yes.
This was honestly one of the most fascinating parts of the book for me. It articulates something that I think a lot of guys feel on a visceral level, but they just haven't had the vocabulary to name it.
The double bind is the ultimate trap for modern men, according to Riker.
Break it down. What is it?
He argues that society demands men be lions in crisis, but lambs in peace.
Lions in crisis, lambs in peace. Okay, expand on that a bit.
Think about how society reacts when things go wrong. When the world is actually dangerous. When there's a war, a natural disaster, a massive supply chain collapse, society suddenly screams for men to be strong.
Right. Get out there and fix it.
Be aggressive, be stoic, be dangerous, be protective. They want the lion. They need the lion to survive.
But then...
But the very second the danger passes, when things are peaceful and comfortable again, society wants those exact same men to instantly become soft.
Emotive. Vulnerable.
Harmless. They want the lamb. And Riker argues you cannot just flip a switch in the male psyche between those two states.
Right. You can't train a man to be a warrior and then get mad at him for having a warrior's temperament.
Exactly. He uses SEAL Team 6 as a prime example of this hypocrisy.
Oh, that was a great example in the text.
When SEAL Team 6 kicked in the door in Abbottabad and took out Osama bin Laden, they were celebrated as global heroes. The media was absolutely fawning over their lethality, their aggression, their brotherhood.
They were the ultimate lions.
But then, Riker notes, fast forward a few months or a year, the narrative shifts. That exact same aggression, that same tightly wound masculine culture that made them effective is suddenly investigated and labeled by the media as toxic hyperaggression.
Wow, yeah. He also mentions the Detroit auto workers in this context.
Right. This is closer to home for a lot of guys. During the massive supply chain crises we've had recently, these blue-collar guys were hailed as absolute heroes.
Working ridiculous hours.
80-hour weeks, keeping the entire American economy breathing, doing brutal, back-breaking physical labor. But then, Riker points out, once things stabilize, these same guys start facing corporate lawsuits for creating hostile environments.
Because they refused to sit through sensitivity training.
Exactly. They were penalized for the very roughness, the very bluntness that allowed them to survive the assembly line under pressure.
It reminds me of the Gillette thing. He talks about that 2019 Gillette ad campaign.
The best a man can be, ad. Riker hammers this point. You have a razor company, a company whose entire existence depends on men buying their product. literally lecturing its own customer base about toxic masculinity.
Telling them they need to do better, be softer.
Right. And Riker points out the financial data on that. Sales dropped significantly after that ad. He uses it as the perfect distillation of the double bind in action. You have corporate entities trying to enforce a new moral standard that actively insults and alienates the very people who provide the utility.
Now, Riker doesn't just, point at this and say, look, this is happening. He really tries to dig into the why.
Yes, he traces the intellectual roots.
Right. He goes all the way back to the Frankfurt School. And again, for the listener, we're just explaining the historical framework he uses here.
Right. So he dives into the mid-20th century, the Frankfurt School, and specifically a theorist named Herbert Marcuse.
Marcuse. And the concept of repressive tolerance, which, just saying it out loud, repressive tolerance sounds like a complete oxymoron.
It's totally meant to be an oxymoron. Marcuse was a Marxist theorist, and he argued that if you want to create a true, lasting revolution in a society, you have to redefine what tolerance means.
Okay, how so?
He said you have to be radically tolerant of any ideas coming from the left, liberation movements, radical social changes, but you must be completely aggressively intolerant of any ideas coming from the right. Traditional values, hierarchy, traditional gender roles.
So it's a one-way street.
Exactly. So under this framework, the censorship and silencing of conservative or traditional voices isn't seen as oppression. It's framed as tolerance because it's supposedly protecting the revolution from regression.
That is wild.
And Riker argues this exact philosophy from the 1960s has now completely taken over modern HR departments, corporate boards, and universities.
He calls them ideological enforcement units.
Yes, they aren't there to protect workers, they're there to enforce repressive tolerance.
And he takes it a step further. He calls this dynamic a satanic inversion.
That's his theological lens coming in. He views cultural Marxism not just as a flawed political theory, but as an actual inversion of the natural divine order.
Because it flips what is valued.
Yes, it punishes strength and it rewards weakness. It punishes objective truth and it elevates subjective feelings. To Riker, that is quite literally satanic.
Which brings us to a major section of the text, the war on reality. This is where he gets into the biology versus ideology debate.
Riker is extremely red-pilled in this section. He argues that the modern movement to deny biological sex isn't just a social trend. He calls it a form of Gnostic heresy.
Gnostic heresy, meaning what exactly in this context?
Gnosticism was this ancient idea that the physical world, the biological body, is just a flawed shell, and that only the inner spirit or the mind truly matters. Riker says that's exactly what modern gender ideology is doing.
Saying your physical body doesn't dictate reality, only your internal feeling does.
Right, and Riker says no. Reality is reality. Biology is destiny.
And he backs this up with some pretty stark data points in the book.
Very stark. He cites data from Sweden, looking at schools that implemented strict gender-neutral policies.
Like getting rid of boys and girls categories entirely.
Exactly. And the data he cites links those policies to a 300% spike in male isolation and depression in those cohorts.
A 300% spike.
Right. His argument is that when you tell young boys that their natural biological instincts to compete, to be rough, to build hierarchies are inherently wrong or toxic, they don't magically become gender neutral.
They just shut down.
Exactly. They withdraw, they isolate. He also brings up the medical realities, discussing the failure of womb transplants in biological males as physical proof that nature has hard, uncompromising boundaries that you simply cannot cross, no matter how much ideology you apply.
He also does this really interesting comparison between mental health in Germany and Poland.
Yes, he references a major study, I believe it was in the Lancet in 2023, and Riker uses it to compare mental illness rates. Right. He looks at Germany, which he characterizes as completely obsessed with gender ideology and progressive social models, and compares it to Poland, which is still highly traditional, highly Catholic, very structured.
And what did the study show, according to him?
He argues the data shows that the traditional structures in Poland, rigid expectations, defined gender roles, actually serve as a massive protective factor against mental illness. Meanwhile, the absolute freedom from norms in Germany is correlating with a severe mental health crisis.
It's the paradox of too much freedom leading to anxiety.
Exactly. But the image from this section that really stuck with me, the one that felt like an absolute punch in the gut.
The rat study.
The Stanford rat study. It is a brutal, brilliant analogy for what he's talking about.
Break that down for us, because this is crucial to understanding the whole mindset of the book.
Okay, so researchers at Stanford set up this experiment. They put rats in electrified cages.
Right.
They divide them into two groups. Group A has a little lever in their cage. Whenever the floor gets electrified and shocks them, if they run over and press that lever, the shock immediately stops.
So they have a way out. They have control.
Exactly. They have agency. Now, Group B is in the exact same kind of cage. They receive the exact same amount of electrical shock, but they have no lever.
Oh, man.
There is absolutely nothing they can do to stop the pain. They just have to take it.
And what was the outcome of the experiment?
Well, Group A, the rats with the lever, they definitely get stressed. They're being shocked, after all. But they survive. They keep functioning. They manage the stress because they know they have a mechanism to fight back.
And Group B?
Group B completely disintegrates. Mentally and physically. They develop severe stomach ulcers. Their immune systems totally collapse. They literally start gnawing on their own limbs in frustration.
Gnawing on their own limbs.
Yes. And Riker uses this to explain the modern crisis of male depression and suicide.
He's saying men today are Group B.
Exactly. He argues that modern men are being constantly shocked. They are shocked by an antagonistic media, by biased family courts, by a culture that tells them they are toxic from birth.
But they've been stripped of the lever.
That's the key. Society has removed the lever. Men aren't allowed to lead. They aren't allowed to be aggressive protectors. They aren't allowed to be the lions. So, stripped of all agency, unable to fight back against the shocks, they self-destruct.
That is. Wow. That sets the stage so perfectly for the rest of the text, because if you are in a cage and you are getting shocked and you have no lever,
You have to build one.
you have to build a lever. Which transitions us perfectly into section 2, the philosophical and theological framework. Riker says, before we get to the actual tactics, we have to go back to the source code of what a man is.
Right. And he starts at the very beginning. The dominion mandate from the book of Genesis.
Subdue the earth.
Exactly. But Riker is extremely careful here to make a distinction. He heavily distinguishes the concept of dominion from the concept of tyranny.
What's the difference in his framework? Because a lot of modern critics hear dominion and they immediately think of like oppressive patriarchy.
Sure. But Riker argues that tyranny is just exploitation. It's using power for selfish extraction. Dominion, on the other hand, is stewardship. It is ultimate responsibility.
Okay, so it's about carrying the weight, not just giving orders.
Right. He argues that a hierarchy is natural, and it is absolutely necessary for any civilization to function. He points to history. You look at Roman engineering, right? The aqueducts. Or you look at Henry Ford's assembly lines.
You can't build an aqueduct by committee.
You really can't. You need a unified plan, and you need a hierarchy of competence to execute that plan. Someone has to lead and someone has to follow, or nothing gets built.
And he ties this back to Genesis by calling the failure to lead the Adam failure.
Yes. This is a very common theme in the manosphere, actually. He argues that the original sin in the Garden of Eden wasn't just Eve eating the apple.
It was Adam standing right there and letting it happen.
Precisely. It was Adam's passivity, his abdication of his responsibility to protect and lead his environment. Riker argues that whenever men abdicate their natural role to lead, chaos inevitably floods in.
And then, keeping with this theme of order versus chaos, he takes this incredibly hard, almost unexpected turn into metaphysics.
Astrophysics.
Yes, the CTMU.
Christopher Langan's theory. Now, for the listener, I've heard of Langan. He's famous for having supposedly the highest IQ in America, right? Like off the charts.
That's the guy. Now, Langan's actual theory, the cognitive theoretic model of the universe, is mind-bendingly dense. It's intense physics and philosophy.
But Riker applies it directly to the concept of masculinity.
He does. And the core concept he pulls from Langan is something called telic recursion.
Okay, let's unpack that. Telic recursion. What does that actually mean?
In a very simplified way, it's the idea that reality isn't just random atoms bumping into each other. Reality is basically a self-configuring language, a system trying to actualize its own potential.
Okay, and what does that have to do with being a man? Riker maps gender onto this theory. He argues that men are the active syntax of reality. They are the embedded
The
operators.
syntax, the code.
Right. And women, in this theoretical model, provide the semantic fields. They provide the meaning, the context, the nurturing environment, the beauty.
But the men are the structure.
The men are the active syntax that makes the program actually execute, the rigid code. And he uses a very modern, real-world example to illustrate this.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk taking over Twitter, well, X now.
Right.
So Riker views Musk's management style entirely through this CTMU lens. Think back to when Musk first bought the company. The media was screaming about chaos.
Because he fired, what, like 75% of the staff right out of the gate?
Exactly. The media said he was destroying the platform, that it was pure chaos. But Riker says, no, you have it backwards. That wasn't chaos.
It was order.
It was an operator stepping into a system, looking at the massive bureaucratic bloat, entropy, and stripping it all away to reimpose syntax.
He was making the code efficient again.
Yes. Riker argues that is the fundamental hardwired role of men in the universe. To step into chaotic situations and impose functioning order.
It's definitely a fascinating way to look at tech management. And he wraps up this philosophical section by bringing in Manichaeism.
The ancient dualism. It's the struggle between light and darkness. Order versus chaos. Truth versus deception.
And he maps this directly onto today's culture war.
Perfectly onto it. He says the red-pilled perspective, the acknowledgement of biological reality and hierarchy, is the light. It is truth. And the blue-pilled progressive perspective is delusion, is the darkness.
So there's no middle ground for him.
None. It is a strict binary battle. You're either operating in reality or you are succumbing to the delusion.
Okay, so we have the diagnosis. We are under a media and institutional siege. And we have the philosophy men are the embedded operators of reality whose job is to impose order.
Right.
Now let's get tactical. Section 3, defensive tactics, armor and bastions. Because this is where the book really shifts from philosophy into a literal, actionable manual.
It does. And he starts with a mental defense mechanism called the gray rock method, heavily tied to stoicism.
Now, gray rock is usually a psychological technique used for dealing with clinical narcissists, right?
Exactly. The premise of gray rock is that you become as boring and unreactive as a literal gray rock on the ground.
You give them nothing to feed on.
Right. A narcissist feeds on your emotional reaction. Riker advises men to use this exact technique in the modern corporate world.
Treat the HR department like a narcissist.
That is exactly his point. When woke ideology or bad faith actors in your company try to bait you into an argument, you do not argue. You don't get angry. You don't show frustration.
You use the 3D framework.
Document, detach, and deploy. You document the interaction quietly. You mentally detach from the emotional bait, and you deploy your legal or structural defenses behind the scenes.
And he has a very specific warning in this section about what he calls the vulnerability trap.
Yes, this connects right back to the double bind we talked about earlier. Riker explicitly tells men, do not fall for the vulnerability trap.
The idea that society says it wants men to be more open and share their feelings.
Right. Every HR seminar, every media article says men need to be more vulnerable. Riker says it is a lie, and he cites research from Yale to back it up.
What did the Yale research say?
The data suggests that men who actually show vulnerability in a professional setting, men who admit to fear or stress or professional failure, suffer significantly more career damage and loss of status than women who do the exact same thing.
Wow.
His argument is that weakness in men is ruthlessly penalized by the collective, regardless of what society says it wants on paper.
So his advice is refuse the bait. Stay totally stoic.
Correct. Do not expose your flank.
Okay.
But defense isn't just mental in this book. It is highly legal.
Right. The section on legal bastions and lawfare, this was incredibly detailed.
He says you have to treat the legal system as a weapon, not just a shield. You don't wait to be defended. You go on the offensive.
He calls it the Peter Thiel strategy.
Yes. SLAPP suits. Strategic lawsuits against public participation. Riker argues that if you are defamed by a media mob or falsely accused by an HR department, you must sue.
And you don't just sue to clear your name?
No, you sue to absolutely bankrupt the accuser. He points to Hulk Hogan versus Gawker, which was famously funded by the billionaire Peter Thiel.
Thiel didn't just want Gawker to apologize, he wanted Gawker wiped off the face of the earth.
He scorched the earth. Gawker ceased to exist. Riker also brings up Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard and the Covington Catholic kid, Nick Sandmann, suing CNN.
Right, Sandman got massive settlements.
These are Riker's prime examples of men fighting back against the media mob, using lawfare, and actually winning.
And there is a very specific practical tip he gives regarding the courts. I remember reading this and thinking, wow, he really goes there.
You're talking about demanding a male judge.
Yeah, that is highly specific advice.
He cites federal judiciary data in the text. He claims there are differential outcomes in free speech and defamation cases based on the gender of the judge.
Okay, what's his argument there?
He argues that male judges are statistically more likely to adhere to strict black and white constitutional interpretations of free speech, whereas, according to his data, female judges might be more inclined to prioritize harm reduction or the emotional impact of the speech.
So he's saying Purely from a tactical standpoint, if you are a man in one of these cases, you want a male judge.
Whether you agree with that assessment or not, Riker presents it as an absolute tactical necessity for legal survival.
Got it. And then there is his advice on workplace interactions, the Pence Rule Plus.
Right. So Mike Pence was mocked relentlessly by the media a few years ago for saying he would never dine alone with a woman who wasn't his wife.
Right.
Riker looks at that and says, Pence was 100% right. In the modern #MeToo era, where a mere accusation is often treated as an immediate conviction.
Where you're guilty until proven innocent.
Exactly. Riker argues that willingly putting yourself in a situation where you are entirely alone with a female colleague is an unforced tactical error.
So he advocates for strict protocols.
The plus in the Pence Rule Plus. Always record your meetings, assuming it's legally permissible in your state. Keep your office doors wide open at all times. Never, ever take a one-on-one meeting behind closed doors.
He literally calls it risk management. Treat it like a liability.
Yes. And speaking of liabilities, we have to talk about the money. Asset protection.
Economic warfare.
He talks extensively about dynasty trusts and moving assets into offshore accounts. He specifically mentions jurisdictions like the Cook Islands and Nevis.
And what's the goal here? Why offshore?
The explicit goal is to protect your wealth from what he terms divorce rape.
Right. The family court system.
He views the family court system as inherently hostile to men. He wants men to construct their finances so that they're legally untouchable. If the system tries to extract your resources, the resources simply aren't in their jurisdiction.
Okay, so you've got your legal team, you're using the Pence Rule, your money is hidden offshore. What about your digital footprint?
Digital battlements. Riker views cybersecurity as a form of spiritual armor.
I love how he ties everything back to that spiritual warfare concept.
It's all connected for him. He says, if you are using captured big tech platforms for your private communications, you are literally handing the enemy your blueprints.
So what's his solution?
Complete migration. He advocates for using Signal for texting, Proton Mail for email, and using burner phones compartmentalized for different areas of your life.
He has a term for this, right? Crypto.
Crypto-agoge.
Crypto-agoge, like
Yeah.
the Spartan-agoge, the brutal training program for young warriors.
Exactly. Train your data to be hard to kill. Make yourself digitally untrackable. And socially, he says you have to move to alternative platforms.
Get off the mainstream ones.
Leave them behind. Move to Gab, move to Rumble, use Substack.
Which transitions us perfectly into Section 4. Because he doesn't just want you hiding on alternative platforms. He wants you attacking.
Offensive strategies,
Right.
reclaiming territory.
Right. And he starts with what he calls satire siege engines. He specifically points to accounts like the Babylon Bee and Libs of TikTok.
This is one of his absolute favorite tactics. He argues that trying to logically debate an absurd ideology is a trap. You can't logic someone out of position they didn't logic themselves into.
Right. If they're denying biological reality, citing a biology textbook isn't going to work.
Exactly. So what works better than debate? Ridicule.
Ridicule.
He actually references Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals here.
Which is funny because Alinsky is like the godfather of left-wing community organizing.
Riker knows that. He's intentionally reversing Alinsky's rules against the left. Alinsky famously wrote that ridicule is man's most potent weapon.
So use the enemy's playbook.
Yes. Riker says the left used ridicule to tear down traditional values for decades. Now the right must use it to expose the absurdities of the progressive agenda.
Give me an example of how he sees this working in real life.
He points to the I identify as an attack helicopter meme.
Oh, classic early internet meme.
Right. Riker says that isn't just a funny joke. It's a weaponized piece of rhetoric. By taking the logic of self-identification to its absolute ridiculous extreme, you expose how flawed the underlying premise is. Satire breaks the spell of the dogma.
That makes sense. He also spends a lot of time on educational reconquest. And for the dads listening, this section is huge.
He is absolutely scathing about the public education system. He doesn't even call them schools. He calls them indoctrination camps.
He argues they focus entirely on oppression narratives and gender studies instead of actual skills.
Exactly. So his solution is radical homeschooling, but he has a very specific aggressive vision for it. He calls it the Benedict option meets HVAC repair.
The Benedict option meets HVAC. Monks who can fix an air conditioning unit. I love that imagery.
It's a great image. The idea is to raise what he calls warrior scholars.
What does a curriculum for a warrior scholar look like?
You teach boys ballistics. You teach them practical trade skills, carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. You teach them logistics. But you also teach them high-level classical academics. You teach them Latin. You teach them the classics.
It's about total self-reliance.
Exactly. He cites a study from Johns Hopkins indicating that homeschooled boys score significantly higher on tests of civic knowledge and historical comprehension than public school kids.
Because they aren't bogged down in the ideology.
Right. He wants to create a generation of men who literally do not need the system because they can build their own houses, fix their own cars, and read their own history.
And speaking of history, he talks about the history wars, specifically tearing down Howard Zinn.
Zinn's A People's History of the United States is basically the standard textbook for the progressive view of history.
Right, the view that America is fundamentally flawed and built on oppression.
Riker advises parents to actively dissect that book with their kids. He says you contrast Zinn's claims directly with primary source documents.
Like Columbus's actual logs.
Exactly. Have the kids read Columbus's own words. Riker's goal is to expose what he calls Marxist deconstruction, the deliberate attempt to tear down Western heroes in order to dollarize the next generation.
So that's how you educate the kids. What about the grown men? How do they build community?
Brotherhood armories.
Brotherhood armories. Sounds intense.
It's all about tribalism.
Yeah.
He argues for the absolute necessity of male-only spaces, and he's very particular about the language here. He hates the term support group.
Why?
Because support group implies therapy. It implies weakness and vulnerability, which we already know he rejects. He wants men to form accountability squads.
Iron sharpens iron.
Yeah, exactly. Pushing each other to be stronger, richer, more physically fit. And he takes it beyond just hanging out. He points to patriot patrols.
Like actual neighborhood defense?
Yes. He uses historical examples, like the men who stood on rooftops to protect their businesses during the LA riots, or the armed citizen patrols that formed during the 2020 unrest.
The Korean roofers are legendary.
Right. He links those kinds of visible, armed, male-dominated patrols to immediate drops in local crime rates. It's about the physical projection of order.
And what about financially? He talks about economic solidarity.
Building a parallel economy. Doing business exclusively within the tribe whenever possible.
If the woke banks cancel your account, what do?
You start your own bank. If the schools fail your kids, you pool your resources and start your own school. You actively starve the beast by refusing to give the captured institutions your money.
Okay, we are entering Section 5, the physical citadel and the spiritual nuclear option. This is where it gets highly personal. It's about the physical body and the soul.
The body is a fortress. Riker is absolutely obsessed with what he calls dietary warfare.
Dietary warfare. He rejects the whole plant-based movement.
Right, completely. He views the push for plant-based diets and soy consumption as a literal attack on male biology. He links those diets to lowering testosterone levels in men.
He calls testosterone the man molecule.
Yes. He views testosterone as the border patrol for the male body. It maintains the physical and mental structure.
And he brings in a study here that is definitely going to raise some eyebrows among our listeners.
The Rotterdam study.
Yes. Walk us through this because it's a huge claim.
He claims this study establishes a biological link between low testosterone and voting for socialist or left-wing policies.
Wait. He is literally saying low T makes you vote socialist.
That is exactly the argument he puts forward in the text.
How does he justify that connection?
He argues that testosterone naturally drives an organism toward risk-taking, autonomy, and competition. It makes you want to fend for yourself and conquer territory.
Okay.
On the flip side, he argues that low testosterone drives a biological desire for safety, consensus, and state protection. You feel weak, so you want a strong, centralized authority to redistribute resources to you.
So to fight socialism.
Eat a steak.
Wow.
He strongly advocates for the carnivore diet. Lots of red meat, raw milk. He says cholesterol is actually vital for brain health and mental resilience.
And training. How should men be working out?
Lifting heavy. Very specifically, deadlifts. He calls deadlifts building structural beams for the body.
Nothing builds back like deadlifts.
Right, and he pairs that with cold plunges.
Immersing yourself in freezing water?
Yes, to spike norepinephrine levels. The goal is to artificially simulate extreme stress on your body on a daily basis so that you build an unbreakable biological resilience. If you can survive freezing water every morning, then an HR meeting isn't going to faze you.
That makes total sense in his framework. And finally, the spiritual nuclear warfare.
This is the capstone. He outright rejects modern mainstream Christianity, which he views as having become entirely effeminate.
Too soft, too focused on turning the other cheek.
Exactly. He says the modern church is just another captured institution. He calls for a return to a warrior faith.
Like the Crusaders.
Exactly. He points constantly to the Psalms as literal combat manuals. His favorite is Psalm 144.1.
Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle.
That's the one. He wants men to adopt what he calls the Templar schedule.
Combining prayer with physical training.
Yes, you lift heavy weights and you pray aggressively. And domestically, he advocates for the Ephesians 5 strategy.
Men as the undisputed head of the household.
Taking on the role of Christ leading the church. Total authority, but also total sacrificial responsibility. And he argues that when men actually adopt this rigid structure, divorce rates plummet because women feel secure in the semantic field while the man handles the syntax.
Man. Okay, so what is the ultimate goal of all of this?
Yeah.
Section 6. The vision of total victory.
The end game.
Yes.
And he is clear. The goal is not just surviving the siege.
The goal is conquest.
Yes. He calls for men to scorch earth the credibility of the media mob. You don't try to reform the universities or the legacy media.
Let the dead bury the dead.
Exactly. You let the old captured institutions rot from their own incompetence. You let them collapse under the weight of their own delusions.
While you build parallel civilizations.
You build new schools, new banks, new media networks that are hyper-competent and based in reality.
And then there's the legacy aspect.
Generational reserves. Dynasty trusts that we talked about earlier.
Passing down the wealth.
Passing down the wealth, but more importantly, passing down the operational code of masculinity to your sons and your grandsons. You make your bloodline immune to the ideological virus.
He ends the book with a really powerful, provocative thought.
Yes. Nature's hierarchy rewards foresight. Lions don't apologize for territory.
Lions don't apologize for territory.
He fundamentally believes that reality is inevitable. The physics of the universe, the CTMU, biological truth, it will all eventually reassert itself. The madness will collapse.
And he wants men to be standing there, fully armored, when it does.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, that was incredibly comprehensive.
It's a massive amount of information to process.
We've gone from understanding the mechanics of a digital media mobbing all the way to building a literal, legal, physical, and spiritual citadel around yourself.
We really went through it. But if you are one of the unbroken few that Riker is specifically talking to in this book, this text is clearly written to be your definitive field manual.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And I cannot stress this enough to the listener. We have truly only scratched the surface here today.
Even with all the detail we just went into, we skipped over so much.
Exactly. If you want the full blueprint, if you want the actual legal templates for those trusts, the specific workout and diet protocols, the deep historical data and citations we just didn't have the time to cover, you need to own this text yourself.
Right. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now. Don't wait. Search for Far Left Madness and buy the ebook.
It is an absolute essential resource if you are in the target audience we've been discussing.
And again, don't forget to follow the author at Conrad Riker over at Substack. He's posting ongoing intel on all of this stuff.
Absolutely. The battlefield is constantly changing, so you need the real-time updates.
Well, we really hope this deep dive gave you some serious food for thought, whether you agree with all of it or you're just trying to understand the perspective.
It's undeniably fascinating.
Remember to like, subscribe, and follow the show. We literally cannot do this without your support.
We appreciate you guys. And I'll leave you with that final, lasting thought from Riker's text. Dominion isn't given, it's taken. The battlefield awaits.
Thanks for listening. Stay sharp out there. We'll see you in the next deep dive.